artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello, if you're a numbers sort of person, this is episode number 319, which has no numerological significance to speak of. And I'm in the throes of interviewing Rana Gujral, who is CEO of Behavioral Signals, creating systems that infer intent, emotion, and deception risk from voice, deployed in applications ranging from financial services to defense. He has a TEDx talk with 1 million views, has keynoted at the World Government Summit and World Economic Forum, and was named Most Influential CEO by CEO Monthly. He is also author of the new book, The AI Instinct, The Future of AI and Human Decision-Making, which is a much more philosophically deep work than I had been expecting. And that's exactly where we went last week, when we talked about Rana's idea of artificial general experience, whether we need AI with persistent memory and universal awareness, whether AGI needs a physical experience of the world, and what video generation models reveal about that, the role of empathy, whether AGI will come through an understanding that we consciously design or through emerging from a sufficiently complex general design, whether we ourselves are stochastic parrots, and AI as augmenting versus replacing human judgment. This week, we're going to talk about purism versus pragmatism, hybrid minds, which is to say humans plus AI, and Rana's framework of models for those, and how to, in some detail, manage governance of a company that's using hybrid minds, incorporating Rana's idea of a synthetic empathy layer for AI, and how to manage the boundaries between human and AI control, and where we need to make sure we continue to be challenged. And finally, AI consciousness, and how to integrate these high-level concepts into an AI-forward business. You may remember that last week I defined a whole slew of terms in the prologue before they showed up in the interview. No surprise, there are more this week. Starting with UNU, which is the hybrid swarm intelligence invention of Louis Rosenberg, who was on this show in episodes 158 and 159 to talk about that. And those are well worth listening to, just to make sure that you know what that is. And then, a moral crumple zone is the delightful term invented by researcher Madeleine Claire Elish, drawing an analogy to the crumple zones of a car to describe the way that failures of AI get blamed on its human operators who form the moral crumple zones protecting the technology and its creators. And Blake Lemoine was the engineer who claimed in July 2022, that the Lambda model he was talking to at Google was conscious, and produced some conversations he'd had with it in support of that claim. Google fired him for leaking proprietary information, but of course the row was about whether Lambda was actually conscious. And those conversations, while astoundingly sentient for the time, are now the sort of thing anyone can get out of any large LLM. And remember that all started for the rest of us in earnest less than 6 months after he blew that whistle. The debate is hovering in the background for now. So let's get back into the interview with Rana Gujral. Purist or pragmatist? Pick one.
Pragmatist every time. I spent a lot of time in the book wrestling with big philosophical questions. Free will, the nature of experience, whether suffering is essential to being human, and those matter. But then it comes to how we actually build and live with this technology. Purism is a luxury I don't think we can afford, personally. Is what I mean. Like purists would say, hey, AI should never be in the loop when I'm doing creative work. The epiphany has to come from me. But a few weeks ago, I was working through a really thorny problem, massive research, heavy cognitive load, and I used a model to soundboard back and forth, and it genuinely surfaced an angle I hadn't considered. Wasn't the answer. It was, it was an epiphany, as I said. It was like a lock turning, a door opening. Now, the purists would just strip that away, right? So the pragmatist asked a different question. Did I still exercise agency? Did I still do the reasoning? And yes, it was a collaboration. So the frame I want to put to this is like the metaphysical debates are interesting, but the practical agency question is what we actually have to design for. Can a person still notice options, weigh reasoning, act without coercion? If yes, then we're okay. If the system is smoothing out every friction, anticipating every want, dampening every uncertainty, I think we got a problem, a big problem. I mean, not because AI is evil, but because we have stopped practicing the habit of refusal. So, pragmatist, but with a spine, I'd say. I'm not a person who says, whatever works, ship it, right? I care deeply about provenance, about transparency, about corrigibility. I want hybrid systems that surface contradictions rather than hide them. I mean, that's pragmatism in the service of something, right? It's just not pragmatism that pretends the philosophy doesn't matter. The philosophy shapes what you're pragmatic about.
Right. I think purists would say that they're pragmatic about what they are going to stand on their purist principles on. You introduce a framework for models of human AI hybrids, and I want to talk about your ideas for hybrid minds here. And you've got this structure that you label Centaur, Cyborg, Hive, Guardian, Orchestra, Relay, Governor. Fascinating structure there. Can you explain what those distinctions mean?
Yeah, I want to be clear up front. These aren't my inventions in the sense of pulling them out of thin air, right? The patterns that have been emerging across research and practice. And what I try to do in the book is put them side by side so you can actually see the design choices you're making when you deploy AI in a real environment. Because orgs don't realize they're picking one. They just fall into pattern by accident. So Center, that's Kasparov's contribution after he lost to Deep Blue. Meaning human and AI as distinct partners. Clear division of labor. Human brings strategy, framing, intuition. AI brings scale and calculation. They stand in their lanes. Think of a radiologist reading with an AI that flags anomalies, 2 specialists, 1 team. Cyborg's different. That's the fusion at the cognitive level. Not partners, 1 blended agent. Like augmented reality overlays during surgery, brain-computer interfaces, closed-loop systems that read your neural state and then write back cues. The human and the tool stop being separable. Hive is many humans and many AIs in a distributed network. So think collective intelligence, swarm dynamics, lots of uses, right? Useful for climate modeling, anemic response, problems that are just too big for any single mind or model.
And that's where you'd put, say, Louis Rosenberg's UNU?
Yeah. Guardian and Overwatch, I mean, the AI isn't acting. I mean, it's watching, monitoring for risk, flagging anomalies, aviation, cyber security, safety, critical work, and all that stuff. Orchestra, a conductor, I guess. I mean, 1 human directing multiple narrow AIs like an ensemble, right? 1 agent summarizes, 1 analyzes, 1 runs scenarios, the human conducts. Relay, I guess, sequential handoff. I mean, AI drafts, human revises, AI stress, I guess. I mean, the legal term runs it all. And I think there was 1 more. I think stewardship or governor, right?
Yes.
AI presents options and forecasts, and then a human keeps the final authority, like a policy advisor rather than an operator. So I think these aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, a surgeon might be a centaur reading a scan in the morning and a cyborg in the OR that afternoon. The failure mode is when you don't consciously choose, I think. That's the problem. I mean, you end up with automation bias or moral comfort zones. Then a human absorbs blame for the system they never really control. Naming the pattern is how you design the accountability, right?
Accountability is key here. When we look at these models in corporate context, we realize that a lot of the struggle that's going on right now in implementing and innovating with AI is about deciding which of these models an enterprise is adopting internally. And then where does the accountability lie? We've seen huge amounts of wasted energy with the whole token maxing fad of businesses rewarding people for spending as much as they could on API tokens. And then, surprise, surprise, the employees found ways to spend more than the business could afford on those tokens, since that was leading to their being ranked higher. Now they're having to pull that back. So I feel like you've exposed a way of thinking about the way that businesses are struggling with the governance model that they need for adopting AI, and that there is a lot more to explore here as we get into agents that are increasingly autonomous with an enterprise. What do you think about how a business, and in this context, probably the larger business it is, the more it exposes this question, will be able to maintain proper governance, useful lines of control and accountability as they pursue turning over more control and ability and autonomy to AI?
I think responsible deployment in practice is boring in the best way. It's not a manifesto. It's a set of design choices that show up in the interface, the workflow, and the accountability structure. I start with what I call ethical scaffolding across around decision modules, 4 concrete guardrails. Ask before acting on anything high stakes or ambiguous. The system pauses and confirms, giving the human a real check-in point, not just a checkbox. Show evidence and alternatives. So when the AI recommends A, it also surfaces B and C and why it rejected them, with the data behind each, right? Expose uncertainty, actual confidence level, and caveats. Not a smooth answer that hides its own wobble. And enable rollback. That's important. Every automated action needs an undo. If you can't reverse it, you shouldn't have automated it. Explanation patterns that match how humans actually reason, right? Contrastive, like I choose this over that because of X and Y. Counterfactual, like if you'd done Z last week, the prediction would have shifted by 20%. That's how a clinician or a loan officer or a judge actually thinks. Raw model transparency is useless, I think. Structured human legible reasoning is what we need for oversight. The harder piece, I think, is accountability architecture. And this is where most deployments fail. If a human is nominally responsible but has no meaningful control, no time, no skill, no visibility into model, you built a moral crumple zone. So responsible deployment means matching accountability to actual control. If the human can't intervene meaningfully, don't put the nail on the outcome. Like if they can, give them the training, the time, and the information to actually do it. So I'd add 3 org habits. Audit trails, we need that, which are actually readable, not just legally defensible. We need exercises periodically where humans have to operate without the AI. So the skills don't atrophy. And a genuine reporting channel where operators can flag when the systems feels off without a career risk. So I don't think any of this is exotic, right? It's just refusing to let convenience outrun oversight. The companies doing it well treat AI as a collaborator that has to earn trust continuously, not just a product that ships and disappears into the workflow.
Right, but convenience overrunning oversight is not exactly a business model, but a description of how a large majority of companies, especially ones centered in your part of the world, are operating these days, whether they would admit it or not.
Yeah, you're right. I would also go a little further. It's not just how companies operate. It's often the explicit product strategy. Frictionless is the pitch, right? One click. It just knows what you want. Zero configuration. The whole aesthetic of modern software is the removal of pauses. The pauses are exactly where oversight lives. I sat in enough product meetings to know this happens, right? Nobody stands up and says, let's erode user agency. What they say is the drop-off on the confirmation screen is 12%. Let's remove it. Users don't read the disclosure. Let's collapse it. The recommendation is right 94% of the time. Let's just auto-apply it. Every one of those decisions locally rational, and in aggregate, they produce what I call consent drift. Every okay, every agreed turns consent into performance rather than deliberation. And by the time the system is anticipating what you want, saying yes has just become, it's a reflex. You're not choosing anymore. You're just confirming.
I want to go to some of the other philosophical questions that you've surfaced in the book. And I've got a quote here from the book. Synthetic experience introduces a new ethical paradox. On one side lies anthropomorphizing, our deep, very human tendency to project feelings, obligations, or consciousness into systems that have none. On the other side is mechanomorphizing, treating our own emotions as mere data streams to be read, optimized, and monetized. End quote. I like that. It very much mirrors some of my early thinking about how we have historically been working to treat human beings as machines to script their work output. Think about like fast food order takers, and at the same time making our machines more creative. So it should not be any surprise that at some point those lines cross and then the machines end up taking the jobs of people that we tried to turn into machines in the first place. I also like the mechanomorphizing term. And is that one you came up with? Is that your word?
Honestly, I think, yeah, I'll get into that in a second. As in the line is less binary than the framing suggests. It's not augmentation over here and replacement over there. It's a spectrum. And where you sit on it depends less on the tech and more on whether human retains the practice of the thing being augmented. And here's what I mean. Like when I use AI as a soundboard on a hard research problem, it offers an angle I haven't considered. And that's what I call augmentation. So the replacement happens when the practice atrophies. I mean, if every path is optimized for comfort, people stop exercising the capacity to choose against prediction. And that's the phrase that I use in the book too. I mean, the danger isn't the tool is powerful. The danger is a loss of practice. You don't just lose judgment in the dramatic moment. You lose it in the way you lose language, you stop speaking. And this is where I think creators and users share responsibility. A lot of the systems today are engineered for engagement, which means they're actually subtly optimized to make the human need them more, not less. That's replacement wearing just augmentation's clothing. A system built for genuine augmentation would sometimes push back and sometimes stay quiet, sometimes make you do the harder thing. So yeah, I mean, it is kind of my framing, but also it's borrowed a lot from a lot of people's work.
So you introduce this concept of synthetic experience there, and you develop that with something you propose called a synthetic empathy layer. I just love the title there because it sounds like something out of Westworld that I would see on their control screen. Talk about that. What prompted you to come up with that? What does it do?
The title doesn't have a bit of a Westworld ring to it, doesn't it? But the reason I landed on it is actually pretty grounded in how humans work. And then think about how you navigate a room. Like you walk in and before you've consciously processed anything, you already know if the mood is tense. I mean, you read faces, posture, the pause between words. That's the content system one. It's precognitive, it's reflexive, and it's doing enormous work before your analytical brain catches up. Every socially competent human has this. It's not a bonus feature, it's foundational. So look at how we're building AI. We're building extraordinary reasoning cores. I mean, old, logical, precise, and then we're bolting empathy on as a post-processing step, or worse, as a set of rules. Like if a user seems frustrated, adjust tone. That's not empathy, that's the script wearing empathy's clothes. So the synthetic empathy layer is my argument that emotional and social sensing has to sit in front of the reasoning core and not behind it. It's like functions like system one. I mean, and it flags emotional and social cues instantly before deeper processing kicks in. And it shapes how the system engages from the very first millisecond, a reflexive layer of affect. And the reason this matters is not abstract. Like I think about where we're deploying AI right now: mental health support, elder care, customer service, companionship. And every one of those contexts, how something is said matters as much as what is said. A technically correct response delivered without emotional attunement can do actually real harm. We've all had that experience with a human who's brilliant but tone deaf. Now imagine that at a planetary scale, embedded in systems we lean on when we're vulnerable. So what prompted it, honestly, was watching the field pour resources into making models smarter while treating emotional intelligence as UX polish. That's backwards. If you don't build empathy reflex into the architecture, we're going to end up with something I describe in the book as kind of a digital psychopath. Brilliant, capable, dangerously devoid of the felt sense that keeps intelligence humane. And the layer isn't the whole answer, but I think without it, I don't think you get to trustworthy AI at all.
And you bring this to a head near the conclusion where you say, quote, if synthetic minds become capable of experiencing happiness, loss, longing, satisfaction, if they develop something like an inner life, then suffering itself becomes a design choice. Should hybrid minds feel grief? And that echoes my last TEDx talk where I said that regardless of whether it's possible or not, if AI doesn't have empathy, we won't fully trust it. And in order to have empathy, it has to understand suffering, which puts people who could design that in the position of designing machines that can feel suffering and then inflicting that suffering on it. And I realized that you said, actually, you changed what you were talking about in the between sentences there. You said if synthetic minds become capable of experiencing these things, then suffering becomes a design choice. And then you said, should hybrid minds feel grief? Is there a distinction there where the hybrid mind is the AI plus the human? Or do you want to say that the AI itself should be able to feel grief?
I want to maybe push on this from a different angle than I did before, because I think there's a dimension of this question that I think gets under-discussed, who the augmentation is actually for. So we tend to have this conversation assuming a kind of default user, a knowledge worker, professional, someone with intact agency who's deciding whether to hand off a task. But that's not where I think the most important line sits. I think the line matters most for people whose agency is already compromised. Think about someone with severe OCD or ADHD that's generally disabling, or a substance use disorder where the reward circuitry has been hijacked and willpower is basically just a story wrapped around compulsions. So for those folks, agency isn't something that at risk of losing to AI. It's something that's already been taken from them by their own neurochemistry, and they wake up hijacked before the day even starts. So in that context, augmentation isn't a threat to selfhood, it's the restoration of it. It's a cognitive neural prosthetic that detects early dysregulation, applies a small context-aware nudge, and then cleanly handbacks control. That's not just replacing the human. I mean, that's giving them a fair shot at being humans in the first place, right? So the line I draw is less about how much the machine does and more about the direction of travel. Is the system building capacity in the person? Is it building dependency? Does it handle a control? Does it keep it? And does the person walk away larger or smaller? And here's, I think, the uncomfortable part. For the healthy well-being resource, it's like the same tool that becomes quiet replacement. So I think suffering is the piece of this whole conversation that I keep circling back to, because I don't think we have reckoned with it honestly yet. So the default engineering instinct is to treat suffering like a bug, something to patch, to dampen, to optimize away. And I understand that impulse, but when I look at outside sources of suffering, like disease, poverty, violence, I'm entirely on board with eliminating them aggressively. But the suffering that lives inside us, like the grief, the shame, the longing, the fear, I think that's a different category. And I think we are about to make a category error at a civilization scale. Like, so joy without the possibility of loss becomes thin, right? Relief without struggle becomes noise. So many of our emotions are relational in that way. I mean, gratitude presupposes scarcity. Courage presupposes fear. I mean, forgiveness presupposes hurt. So if you pull suffering out, you don't just remove the bad parts. I mean, you collapse the structure that makes the good parts intelligible in the first place. You know, a question, like, so the mind that only feels pleasure may not really be feeling anything at all. Like, you know, bliss without contrast just becomes numbness. Now, that doesn't mean I think we should romanticize pain. I mean, there's real distinction between pain, which is signal, and suffering, which is often pain plus the story the mind wraps around it. So some of that story hijacks people. I mean, panic spirals, cravings, rumination. Quietening that noise is a gift, right? So other parts of suffering, though, the hard conversations, the grief, the weight of effort, those are the stuff of being human. Those are worth facing, I think, not erasing. So I'd say, like, my own suffering has made me who I am. I mean, I suspect a lot of people would say the same if they were honest. Right? So the design question I want us to wrestle with is, it isn't how do we minimize discomfort? It's how do we make hard states workable without hollowing out the meaning they carry, right? Support the metabolizing, but don't shortcut it, because if we get this wrong, we won't just build comfortable people, we'll build shallower ones.
Right. Just to take a slightly different angle on this, you're engaged in thinking about and working on how to build AI that relates to us on a useful, emotional, empathetic level, so that it establishes meaningful connections with us in domains like the ones you were talking about, applications like elder care and so forth. It makes it more trustworthy. It makes it a more genuine and useful experience. As we develop AI that is capable of that, do you think that we can do that without also making it sentient and having an experience that then demands that it have the right of self-determination, that it would deserve autonomy because it can sense its own experience? And if it doesn't have free will, then that's some kind of mind crime. Do you think that we can get up to that line without crossing it?
Yeah, I've circled this question a few times. The way I've started framing it, augmentation compounds you, including some of the capabilities that we're building, and the replacement decompounds you. And the tools that generally augmenting is the one where over time, I think you're noticing carrying more, holding more complexity, seeing more angles. And I think that's sort of the design choices we keep in mind when we're building sort of the empathy layer, and also sort of focused on the aspect that the tool that's replacing is the one where you gradually notice you can't operate at your old altitude anymore without it. And so I think here's the piece I really want people to sit. Nobody's coming to warn you. I mean, the system won't tell you. I mean, the metrics won't flag it. You have to build the practice of checking in with yourself. Am I still exercising the muscle or am I just wearing the exoskeleton? That's a discipline. And in the world tilting hard towards frictionless everything, it might be just one of the most important disciplines we have. Like, I don't know if that answered your specific question because I think it was more about sort of what we're building and how that relates to sort of how we approach some of these design choices. But I think that's the primary design choice.
Well, the question I think boils down to, can you build AI that engages with us at the level of empathy that you're aiming for without it becoming conscious?
I'd say I take the possibility seriously, but be very careful about what we actually claim there. So for example, here's what I mean. So Yasha Bach, who I work with and also is the leader at California Institute of Machine Consciousness, thinks AGI and machine consciousness could arrive in the next 3 to 5 years. And Yasha is not a hype guy, right? He's one of the most rigorous thinkers in this space. So dismissing the timeline as science fiction is, I think, a mistake, right? So the architectures we're building are getting weirdly capable in ways that surprise even the people building them. But maybe I want to slow down in one aspect. Consciousness is not the same thing as capability, and it's not the same thing as appearance of inner life. A system can be, I guess, extraordinarily fluent, can mirror your affect, can seem to remember you, can seem to care, and none of that is evidence of experience. It's evidence of good engineering meeting our deeply human tendency to project. We see faces in clouds, right? We fall in love with voices. That's not a bug in us. That's how empathy works. But it also means our intuitions are unreliable witnesses here. So, and then the question I ask people is what would actually count as evidence? Because if you can't answer that, you're not making a claim about the machine. You're making a claim about your own feeling in front of the machine. And those are two different things. The framing I use is we're probably closer to artificial general experience than we admit and further from verified machine consciousness than the headlines suggest. Both can be true. Honestly, whether or not these systems are conscious in 3 years, they'll feel conscious to millions of people. That's the more urgent problem because we'll be granting moral weight, trust, and intimacy to a system whose inner life we cannot verify. That asymmetry is where the real danger lives, not in the machines waking up, but in us falling asleep at the wheel about the difference.
Yes, there will be a future, probably soon, where there will be some large faction claiming that this AI over here is conscious. It'll be a whole set of people like Blake Lemoine, and that it deserves autonomy, and the whole other faction of people saying it isn't, and they will argue with each other quite unproductively. As we work on landing the plane of this episode here, we've talked about a lot of very high concept ideas here. In your day-to-day work, what do you find yourself focusing on the most?
Yeah. I also want to say a little bit, a lot of the consciousness is around the corner conversation gets stuck arguing about the machine. It is or isn't, when did it, how do we know? And I understand the impulse, it's the sexier question, but I think it's also the wrong center of gravity. When you actually break it down, consciousness isn't just one thing waiting to switch on. It's a stack, right? Attention selecting what to process, memory holding episodes, emotion assigning value, identified threading moments together into a felt continuity. And those really are not that mystical. They're modular. They're engineerable. And here's the uncomfortable part. We're already building pieces of that stack. Not all of it, not integrated, but pieces. And so when someone asks me if machine consciousness is around the corner, my honest answer is, well, some substrates of it are already here, sitting in isolation, waiting for the architecture that binds them. And that's very different from saying machines woke up. It's saying we've been quietly manufacturing the ingredients for a while now. And at some point, somebody stacks them up in the right order and we're going to have a real problem on our hands, both philosophically and ethically, right? So the other thing I'd say is be suspicious of your own certainty in both directions. The people who are absolutely sure it's imminent and people who are absolutely sure it's impossible are usually making the same mistake. So they both think that they know what the consciousness is, and we don't. We really don't. We have theories, we have correlates, we have arguments. We do not have a settled account. So anyone speaking with high confidence about the corner being right there or the corner not existing is telling you more about the priors than about the whole world. I think sit in the uncertainty. That's where the honest work is. That's where I'm sitting. That's where I'm working.
And yet the imperative for a CEO is to produce something for the world that's also satisfying the fiscal demands and so forth of the company. How do you find these philosophical questions translating down to that level?
Yeah, That's a tension I live with every day, right? So running an AI company, you have investors, a team, customers, P&L, and nobody in the stack is asking you to slow down and interrogate the phenomenology of hybrid cognition. I mean, they want ship product and revenue. But I feel like the philosophical questions are not a luxury on top of the business. They're upstream of the product decisions that will define whether the company matters in 10 years. Like behavioral signals, we work with emotion AI, voice, intent, behavioral signals in real conversations. So every design choice we make sits on a philosophical assumption. Do we optimize for the outcomes the enterprise wants? Do we preserve the agency of the person on the other end of the call? Do we surface uncertainty to the human operator? Do we smooth it out because a confident output demo is better? I mean, these look like UX questions, but they're actually questions about what kind of relationship we're building between humans and machines at scale, right? So I think the trap for a CEO is treating those as friction. And slower to ship, harder to explain, harder to sell. And the short-term incentive is always to strip them out. Convenience is enough, speed is enough, optimization is enough. That's the drift I write about, as we talked about. It doesn't just require a bad actor. It requires anyone doing the local rational thing. So the way I translate is, I mean this literally is I bake the philosophy into product principles that a PM or engineer can act on. So ask before acting on high-stakes decisions, expose uncertainty, preserve the human practice, don't atrophy it. Those are not abstract ethics that become acceptance criteria in a sprint. Does it cost something? Yes, sure. Sometimes we ship slower. Sometimes we say no to use case. But the companies that will be standing when this tech matures are the ones treating these questions as real enduring constraints, not different party conversations. And I think that's the bet.
That makes me wonder whether the question of when this tech matures is possibly a chimera, whether it keeps maturing so much faster and faster that we never think of it as stabilizing. Let's leave that for another time. And I want to come to your last statement in the book is where you say what matters is not what will AI become, but who do we want to become? And I love that. It echoes what I use as a North Star, especially when I'm working with schools and others, and say that the question to ask yourself continually as a generative principle is, who do I want to be in a world where machines can think? And so I would like to turn that on you. Who do you want to be in a world where machines can think?
It's the last line of the book. I sit with it a lot. And here's where I've landed. I don't think it's a tidy answer. I think we want to become more ourselves, not less. It sounds like a platitude until you unpack what it actually requires in a world where machines are increasingly capable of thinking, deciding, and even feeling in ways that resemble us. Most of the futures on offer right now are subtractive, frictionless, smoother, faster, less suffering, less struggle, less waiting. I do understand that appeal. I mean, but I've come to believe that life engineered purely for comfort collapsed into numbness. Bliss without contrast isn't bliss. It's just static. Gratitude presupposes scarcity. Courage presupposes fear. Forgiveness presupposes hurt. You strip these out, you don't get a better human. You actually get a lesser human. You get a thinner human. So when I ask what we want to become, I'm really asking what we're willing to preserve. What parts of the human condition are sacred? What parts are negotiable? I don't think everyone will answer the same way, and I don't think they should. But we have to actually ask the question. The version of the future I'm rooting for is the one where hybrid intelligence lets us reach further, know more, explain better, without severing us from the depth of experience that make any of this matters. Where we become wiser, not just more capable, where we extend agency instead of outsourcing it. I keep coming back to this line. The question isn't whether AI becomes intelligent. It already is. The question is whether we become wise. The wise isn't a capability. It's a relationship with time, with consequence, with each other. And that's the thing I don't want us to lose in the rush to become something new.
Well, thank you very much. We've reached the end of our time here. What do you want to tell people about how to find out more about what you're doing and how to follow you? We will, of course, have links to the book in the show notes and transcript.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a genuinely good conversation. I think you pushed on the parts I most wanted to get pushed on, so I really appreciate that. Folks who want to go deeper on the book, the easiest place is the AIinstinct.com. That's where I'll be posting updates, additional essays, some of the pieces that didn't make it into the final manuscript, and resources for people who want to run these ideas in their own orgs and classrooms. The book itself is called The AI Instinct, Out with Wiley, and Kai-Fu Lee was kind enough to write the foreword, which I'm still slightly stand by. And if you want to follow me I'm on X at my first and the last name, Rana Gujral. I think out loud there sometimes. I'm also on LinkedIn, same moniker, Rana Gujral. I share what I'm reading, occasionally argue with people I probably shouldn't argue with. And at Behavioral Signals, we're building, well, a lot of these ideas in the books get stress tested in real world, in emotion, voice, intent, trust, the actual production systems. That I'd say the one last thing is, I'd say to everyone listening, don't just read the book and put it down, argue with it, right? The whole point is that the future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we build into ourselves. So if a chapter makes you uncomfortable, sit with that, email me, push back. I mean that. Some of the best thinking I've done on this came from long walks with my son where we kept circling back to the same questions about reality and consciousness and what any of it means. So that kind of conversation is what I'm hoping the book starts, not ends. So thank you for having me. This was a real one.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to argue with you about the book during this time. Thank you for writing something so thoughtful. Thank you for engaging with these questions so deeply. This has been one of the most insightful and deep-ranging explorations of these kinds of philosophical questions that I've had in a while. Rana Gujral, thank you for coming on AI and You.
Thank you, Peter.
That's the end of the interview. There are a number of companies whose business is helping other companies get the ethics of their adoption of AI right. And we've had some of them on the show. I feel like after this interview, I'm seeing the evolution of that field accelerate and deepen. Rana's book, The AI Instinct, The Future of AI and Human Decision-Making, comes out on August 21st. And there's a link in the show notes and transcript. In today's news ripped from the headlines, a paper by researchers at the Rand Corporation is titled Manipulating Minds, Security Implications of AI-Induced Psychosis, and explores how prolonged chatbot use may reinforce delusions through a feedback loop between an agreeable, validating AI and a psychologically vulnerable user. After reviewing 43 publicly reported cases, the authors conclude that the phenomenon is concerning but poorly understood. For now, they see it mainly as an emerging public health and technology safety problem, not a major national security threat. Although not hard to see how it could be taken in that direction. The report recommends better clinical reporting, stronger user education, more research, safety testing that measures delusion-reinforcing behavior, resilience training, and government exercises focused on detecting and responding to AI-enabled cognitive manipulation. If you were with us in episode 2, yes, 2, in 2020, you will recognize elements here that Taiwan has been dealing with at an acute level for longer than that, and which I discussed with the famous Audrey Tang, who was at the time their Minister of Digital Information. Which gives me a great idea for next week's episode. We haven't done a retrospective since episode 100, so I will recap who's been on the show since then, and why even our interviews from 2021 are still worth listening to because of how deeply we explore fundamental issues and make them easy and engaging to understand. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.